learning summary video. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the class and found it extremely thought-provoking. It certainly caused me to analyze my own biases and behaviors, for which I'm grateful. I think it'll make me a better public administrator, as well as just a better member of society moving forward. I also thought the course material was very relevant to what has been happening in the world recently in regards to the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing protests. I thought the situation provided a lot of academic depth to the material and certainly a real-world example in real time. The first primary lesson I learned from the material was that a good administrator consistently searches for, identifies, and addresses their own unconscious biases. As the readings outlined, these biases naturally exist. We are conditioned by our environment and our upbringing, and everybody has them, whether they be implicit prejudices, in-group favoritism, and they're not something we should be ashamed of. As I mentioned, they are a natural occurrence, but it is incumbent upon ourselves to, one, just recognize that these biases exist, and then recognize our own specific biases so that we can not let them impede our decision-making process. Too often, administrators are even afraid to recognize that the problem exists or their biases exist, and therefore they can never solve the problem. It is also important to note that these biases must be consistently checked due to the environment consistently changing. It's not a one-and-done type thing, so we must always be trying to identify our unconscious biases so that we do not let them affect our wise decision-making process. The second primary lesson is in regards to the frames in which individuals view society and interactions, and how that relates to privilege. It's critical to identify privilege and how it has shaped our personal frame, and make an effort to see society and situations through the framework of those who may have less privilege, may have more privilege, or may be without privilege. A primary example of this comes from the Sue reading. Dr. Sue reveals an anecdote in which him and another colleague were asked to move to the back of the plane due to weight distribution. However, they were offended that two people of color would be asked to move to the back of a vehicle. When they confronted the flight attendant, she got defensive and said that she didn't have a racist bone in her body. And though they viewed the same situation, they viewed it completely differently, and this is due to their difference in frames. Dr. Sue and his colleague state that this is not the first time that this has happened to them. Furthermore, they had heard similar instances from peers in their group, and they viewed it as a pattern of discrimination. However, the white flight attendant who asked them to move has not experienced a multitude of racially charged interactions, nor do they hear about them from people in their group. So from her lens, it was a singular event, and something to be dismissed, no pattern. So this just exemplifies how different frames affect different perceptions. It is important to try to see these interactions through the frame of other people. That is the perspective that Dr. Seuss spoke of. As they say, the value of perspective cannot be understated. Attempting to view interactions through the frames of different people will lead to just a general better understanding, less microaggressions, and more societal harmony. In regards to public administration, it'll lead to more organizational success. The third primary lesson in public service is that racism is, in fact, systemic and institutionalized, And even though there are laws outlawing racial discrimination, there's still legislation passed that implicitly discriminates on the basis of race. One primary example of this was a law recently passed in Florida in which they rescinded felons' voting rights until they had paid all their fines and restitution to victims. While on the surface this may not seem inherently racist, due to the fact that the criminal justice system is undeniably biased against African Americans and people of color, this new law disproportionately affected African American voters. As a public administrators and leaders, we must, one, be aware of the effects our legislation has and avoid unintentionally discriminating against certain groups. And two, we must focus on changing the course of social and racial injustice, i.e. institutional racism, instead of just trying to quell the symptoms, i.e. protests. Coming back to the George Floyd example, this has been a major debate. Unfortunately, I think the current leadership is focusing on the symptoms, the protests, instead of the root cause of institutionalized racism. As leaders moving forward, we must be better than that. I just would like to say I thought this was an awesome class. I really appreciated all the material, and I certainly learned a lot, and I think it is going to serve all of us moving forward. I hope everyone had a good Maymester, and I hope you get a break this summer. And I hope we get out soon. Take care, everybody.